The sun dipped low over the vast Wyoming plains, turning the dust-touched horizon into a band of molten gold as Elena Woodcrest tightened her shawl against the rising afternoon wind, her heart thudding with a mix of fear and hope as she searched for the lost mare she had chased farther than she ever intended, deeper into the wildlands where the ranch fences ended and the untamed world began, a place said to belong not to people but to the wind, the mountains, and the legendary herds of wild mustangs that roamed like living storms across the earth. She had grown up hearing those stories, how the ground trembled before them, how their hoofs could shake fear into the bravest men. Yet nothing in her life prepared her for the sight that now froze her breath, for as she stepped through a narrow cut of rock into the wide basin below, she saw hundreds of stallions and mares surging like a living river, their muscles rippling, their manes streaming behind them like banners of fire, thunder rolling under their hooves as they stampeded in a fury that seemed to swallow the world. And in that moment she knew she had made a terrible mistake, because she had wandered straight into the center of their path, the ground vibrating so violently that she stumbled, her basket tumbling from her hands as her mare's frightened whinny vanished in the roar of the herd. Panic washed over her, breath leaving her lungs in a strangled cry as the first wave of mustangs crested around her like the crest of a tidal wave, their eyes wild, their nostrils flaring, their legs pounding so fast she could barely see them, and for a terrifying heartbeat she believed this was it. Her story would end here in a whirlwind of dust and hooves, until another sound cut through the chaos, sharp as a whip crack, a sound she felt before she heard. The split-second rhythm of a single horse charging at impossible speed, slicing through the stampede as if the chaos parted for him alone. It was Colt Maddox, the cowboy of iron grit and impossible calm, the man people whispered about for his ability to tame anything with 4 legs and a spirit fierce enough to try and kill him. A man with a reputation carved from danger and dust, riding his coal-black stallion, the legendary Onyx, whose hooves tore through the earth like sparks in a storm. Colt leaned forward in the saddle, eyes locked on Elena, jaw tight with determination as he maneuvered through the stampede with the skill of someone born in the saddle, someone who treated chaos like a dance partner, guiding Onyx with subtle touches as he dodged bucking stallions, weaving between the rush of bodies, the world narrowing to a tunnel of survival until, with a shout that cut through the roar, he reached her just as she stumbled backward, her foot catching on a stone, the shadow of a massive mustang looming over her, and before she could scream he swept his arm down, scooping her up with a strength so sure and practiced she barely felt the lift before she was pressed securely against his chest, her arms instinctively wrapping around him, face buried in the leather of his duster as Onyx pivoted sharply, powerful legs coiling then springing them away from the deadly river of horses. Dust filled the air, their lungs burning but their will unbroken as Colt guided them through the storm, Elena hearing the thunder of hoofs closing behind them, feeling every jolt of Onyx's stride as they surged toward the narrow gap between 2 jutting cliffs, the only escape from the basin, the only hope of outrunning nature's fury. The world blurred, wind screaming in her ears, dust burning her eyes, the heat of Colt's body steady against her as he held her securely, murmuring calm reassurances meant as much for Onyx as for her. And then they burst through the rocky pass into the open grasslands, the roar of the stampede fading behind them like a memory dissolving into quiet. But Onyx didn't slow until they reached the safety of a ridge overlooking a shallow creek, and only then did Colt ease the stallion to a halt, breathing hard, shoulders rising and falling as Elena clung to him, trembling with delayed fear, her heart beating so wildly he could feel it against his chest. Colt's voice, low and steady, broke through the pounding in her ears as he tilted her chin gently, his calloused hand surprisingly gentle as he asked if she was hurt, if she could speak, and when she finally found her voice, it came out in shuddering breaths as she confessed she thought she was going to die, that she shouldn't have been out there alone, that she had been foolish looking for the mare without telling anyone, but Colt just shook his head with a soft grin, saying no one who loves something enough to chase it is ever foolish, that courage and fear live in the same heart, and that she was lucky, because he had been on the ridge above, watching the herd, and something had pulled his eyes toward the exact spot she had wandered into, like fate itself tapping his shoulder and whispering run. Elena looked up at him then, really looked at him, seeing not just the hardened cowboy everyone else saw but the man with warmth behind his eyes, with kindness sewn into the seams of his soul, and something inside her shifted, a warmth blooming through her chest as she whispered her gratitude, tears welling in her eyes as the weight of what she'd survived settled into her bones. Colt brushed a thumb beneath her eye, wiping away the tear before it fell, his voice gentle as he told her she didn't owe him anything except one promise. That she wouldn't walk through these wildlands alone again, not when the world was full of dangers big enough to swallow a life in a second. She promised, voice steadying, and he helped her down from Onyx, keeping one arm around her waist when her legs wobbled, guiding her toward the creek where she splashed cool water on her face, trying to wash away the dust and fear. The evening air grew softer, the sky shifting into a canvas of purples and embers, the danger behind them now, and as they sat side by side on the ridge, Colt told her stories of mustangs, how they were born fierce, how they lived free, how their stampedes were rare and powerful, a symbol of nature's raw untamed force, and Elena listened with rapt attention, her heartbeat slowly calming as she realized how close she had come to never hearing another word, never seeing another sunset, never feeling the quiet warmth of someone sitting beside her in shared silence, and somewhere in that fading light, she found herself leaning closer to him, her shoulder brushing his, Colt glancing at her with that soft half smile that always seemed to say more than his words ever did. The world felt different now, brighter, safer, more alive, and as Onyx grazed quietly nearby, Elena whispered that she didn't know how to repay him, to which Colt replied with a low chuckle that he didn't rescue her for repayment, he did it because when a heart calls out, someone has to answer, and he wasn't about to ignore the kind of fear he saw in her eyes. She felt warmth spread through her again, deeper this time, and she told him he was braver than anyone she knew, that she understood now why people spoke of him like he was made of legend, and he shook his head, saying he wasn't a legend at all, he was just a man who tried to do right when the moment demanded it. The silence that stretched between them after that was comforting. uncomfortable, almost sacred, the kind of silence shared only by those who had fought the same danger and survived together, and eventually the stars appeared. The wide western sky glittering above them as Colt saddled up Onyx again and offered her a hand, saying he'd ride her home, make sure she reached the ranch safely, and she took his hand without hesitation, feeling the strength in his grip, the safety in his presence. As they rode through the twilight, Elena resting against his chest once more, she found herself thinking that maybe fate hadn't just saved her life. It had brought her exactly where she was meant to be, into the arms of the man who rode into chaos for her without a second thought. And as the ranch lights flickered into view like grounded stars, she whispered a quiet promise to herself that this moment, this connection, would not be the last, because hearts that collide in danger rarely drift apart in peace. When they reached her porch, Colt helped her down, lingering for a moment as she steadied herself, his eyes searching hers with something unspoken, something warm and new, and Elena felt her breath catch as he tipped his hat and told her she was safe now, that he'd be back in the morning to check on her. And before she could stop herself, she asked him softly if he always rides into danger for people, and he replied just as softly, only for the ones who matter. She blushed, warmth filling her chest, and as he rode away into the moonlit night, she watched him until he disappeared over the hill, knowing deep down her life had changed forever. And to all the viewers watching this story unfold, if you felt the rush of the stampede, the thrill of the rescue, and the spark between two souls destined to meet, make sure you subscribe to the channel.